Welcome back to Sow and Tell.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
I'm Craig Hoover.
I'm Brian Wright.
And we are the development team for Armistead, your newest agri-hood coming to Franklin, Tennessee, very, very soon, or as soon as possible, we'll say.
That's right.
Yes. So it's been a few weeks since we've had an update and a podcast. It doesn't mean we haven't been working. Today, we are going to go over a discussion with Marianne Warren and Bill Short, aka Bilbo Short. This is kind
not
of
the Hobbit.
No, he is hardly that. This is sort of the matriarch and patriarch of the Short family. They've been around the longest, and they share a lot of their experiences and their and just what life was like back in the day on the farm. And it's a really fascinating discussion. And it's kind of neat because, Brian, you haven't heard it yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to dive in. And, one of the things that's always interesting to me when I'm hearing from family or talking with them is to hear their stories. And it brings the property to life in a different way than you think about if you're thinking about a development project or, what's going to be built there in the future. But hearing those stories from the people who lived them firsthand, it just makes the whole thing so much more interesting as we think about the history and think about the future.
Yeah, for sure. Before we do get to that, we should give our listeners a little bit of a development update. When we last spoke, we were about to submit our development plan to the city. What have we been through since then?
Well, we did it.
Yes.
We submitted. So that's great. We have been having lots of discussions with the city. And as you can imagine, with all of the unique things that we've shared about the project, it breaks the mold a little bit. So we've been having to go through the process of explaining why and how and what we're doing, sort of making the case for the unique attributes of the community. And, just so the city has a good feeling about, all the elements that they're concerned about, like stormwater and, various other elements, traffic, et cetera, fire protection, all of that, all the sort of more utilitarian things are covered while we're doing this really, amazing at next level sort of visionary project. And so we've been going through that process with them, all the different departments. We've been meeting with talking to some of the BOMA members and, different elected and appointed officials to, try to make sure that everything's tracking along nicely. And then as we've been going, we've been hearing from, more and more people who are interested in being a part of the community, looking at, different builders, just people, the momentum and enthusiasm for the project has been building while we've been handling the kind of back of house part of getting the project through the approval process.
Right. And schedule wise, we are essentially on track here for a, April, May, June of next year, sort of approval. And then we can start moving dirt to implementing the design shortly thereafter. So if you haven't signed up to our mailing list, please do go to armisteadtn.com and sign up. And we can, we'll continue to update everyone on that progress. And we will also talk about the different opportunities for you to come out and support us at the various public meetings that will be upcoming once we submit and once we start to go through what is the maze of the Franklin City planning. But I will say this about the city staff and certainly the BOMA members, particularly our alderman, Matt Brown. They have been incredibly supportive. I mean, look,
right.
there's the staff can only do so much. They've got to adhere to the zoning code as it lies, and but they have been working with us really well to say, look, here's how we might get there from here.
Right.
And I think that's important to note that while we still have to work through, some changes, they aren't wholesale changes necessarily. And we still have the opportunity to go through and get pretty darn close to the plan.
Right. And, really, when we're looking at it at this point in the process, we are really starting to get into the details. And these are details that, as developers, as planners, we see, and there are things that we want to do. Like, oh, this will be so amazing. No one will have ever seen anything like this. It'll blow everyone's mind and they're going to love it. But they aren't things that if we end up to not be able to find a way to accomplish one thing, or, detail of that detail, that the project will seem different. It's likely that to be things people won't even notice. Right. Unfortunately, or fortunately,
it's like this. It's like the stuff on the Apple iPhone cutting room floor. It's like there's probably some really cool features out there that we never get to see,
right?
Because they couldn't quite pull it off exactly the way they wanted, but it's still a pretty cool machine
nonetheless.
Awesome. Okay, so let's get to the interview. So I want to also thank Jay Sheridan. You don't see or hear him on the tape. Jay Sheridan is a local public relations guy and a writer. And if you haven't seen his newest book on historic Franklin, he and Robin Hood did this amazing coffee table book about the history of Franklin. Go check that out. But he came in. He's a historian and a great interviewer. So he was kind enough to come over and definitely interviewed Marianne and Bilbo, and so we kind of cut it up and we'll serve it up to you in this way. But I wanted to set this up, and I look forward to your hearing of it. It's really special. These guys have been obviously they've been on the farm for a very, very long time, and they've been in Franklin or in Tennessee for a really long time, and their histories are exactly the ones we're trying to preserve and be mindful of and keep their stories alive. And we're going to do that in various ways on the farm. And so it's important for us to hear them. And I think this is a really neat thing. So let's kick it off. This little section here, they just go sort of introduce themselves and talk about their first jobs on the farm. It's pretty cool. All right, so have a listen.
Let's get to work.
My name is Marianne Short Warren. I was the oldest of the 4 children that Alma and Jesse had.
I'm Bill Short, full name William Miller Short, named for my father's dearest best friend, Mr. William Miller of Gray Drug Company. His nickname being Bilbo, I acquired that nickname from birth. It came with the free instructions, and I've enjoyed it all my life. I enjoy being a tribute to Daddy's best friend. He was our Uncle Willie. Lived on the farm from 1949 through 1971, and been back, many times a year since, and continued in my way to contribute to the work of the farm, but have lived away in Memphis pretty much ever since that time. But I refer to home with a capital H as here in Franklin and that farm. Home with a lowercase would be Memphis. So although I've lived there 57 years, this is still home. As an employee of Westbrook Farm, at 8 years old, one of my jobs was to collect the eggs in the chicken yard. And I would take those up in a little blue tin spatterware bucket, which I still have. And I would collect the eggs. I would take them up to the back door and yell, "Eggman!" And Mother would come out, tired, busy farm wife, wiping her hands on her apron. And she'd look at my, collection and decide what I got paid for it.
Making butter. They would bring milk to the house, some of it was sold. But you would take the cream, and then you made butter from it. We had churns, and you're talking about arms that were tired. You sit and you turn, this was a glass bottomed, and then a paddle kind of thing.
A daisy churn.
Is that what it was? Mm-hmm. Okay. I didn't know the name. But anyway, you turned and you turned and you turned. It seemed like forever. It was probably 15 minutes. But when you're 8 or 9 or 10 years old, sitting there just doing this is boring. Then you would work it with a paddle. You'd take the top off that.
But you'd see the flakes of butter come.
Oh, yeah. You'd start to see it develop.
Yeah.
You'd take your paddle and you'd push it against the side. Paddle was like a big spatula. I remember it being wood now.
It was.
Was it? Yeah, that's what I remembered. But you would take it and you would push till you could get as much of the liquid out of it. Then that we had a butter mold. It's wood, had a hole in the bottom and a false bottom in that you could push it with a dowel or handle that came under and push it up. And you had a rectangle of butter, and it was approximately a pound. So that's what I would do, is pack that in there and drain the liquid off and then take it out.
The time book thing, Daddy decided that I was old enough to start helping feed the calves. So the calves for the dairy farm, the female calves were kept, the bull calves were sold. And they were raised in what had been an old buggy house that had the different conveyances that our grandparents would ride in. And it was fitted out so that we could make a milk replacer as rich as the mother's milk, but with more assurance as to the minerals and the vitamins that each calf would get. So he taught me how to mix that up. He taught me how much of how to feed a calf who was used to nursing up for an udder and how to make it nurse down into a bucket. They figured that out pretty quickly. That started at 8 years old, so I was glad to have an income. So with the other farm hands, we'd line up, and he would be at his roll-top desk writing checks, and mostly I was paid in cash because it was such a small amount of money. But he would always ask me, now, what are you going to do with this money? And I would have to tell him, I'm going to buy some things for school or looking to get a set of roller skates. The families that lived with us, the dairymen and the people in the tenant house on the other place, as part of the bargain for working with us, they each got a side of beef, dressed out, labeled, and they got a whole hog, also dressed out and labeled. So they had those to draw on during the year. They had free rent. We paid the utilities. They paid for a phone if they had a phone. That's all they had to pay. And every Friday, Daddy would talk to them if they had a debt. Sometimes they came to us in debt or they were trying to buy a truck. He would explain to them, here's what you're getting this week. Would you like for me to save some of this, put it aside to amortize the debt you have? People came to us. I remember Tommy Stafford wanted to buy a pickup truck. He left us, truck paid for, had cleaned up all of his debt. He wanted to go work in a factory, which he did for a year. He came back to work with us. He decided it was a sure thing to know he was going to have his economy would be taken care of. So, again, a banker and a farmer.
Well, awesome. Well, there we have it. So that's Marianne and Bilbo.
Awesome.
Yeah,
eggs and butter. That's
right. The original Eggman and the first Mrs. Buttersworth. No, they. It's really neat to hear them and to talk about that. And I think one of the things that we really hope to do with some of the existing buildings is to take some of those vestiges, like, have a good butter churn in there. And then obviously we'll have an egg program and, who knows, maybe we'll have a little Eggman, a little mascot and go around and honor a Bilbo there. Okay. So this next piece here is all about this, what they had on the farm, right? So that's one of the things that I think is going to be really neat about this community is that so many of the things that the daily needs that we'll have are going to be available to you right there. And we're going to take that a step further because we'll have some commercial and retail, right?
Maybe even weekly needs.
Exactly. So there'll be a real grocery store and there'll be a real, but then they'll also have the eggs and the vegetables and all the stuff that they had on the farm. So let's hear them talk a little bit about what they had on the farm.
See, so much of what we had on the farm, we didn't buy much. We had butter. Oh, we'd make cottage cheese too. That would be in a sack. Cheesecloth, or it might be a flour sack because we had a lot of flour sacks. So
is it with the whey? Yeah,
it's clabber. First, you let the milk sour by sitting out on the back porch, screened-in porch, in a big old jar. It would clabber, and Daddy loved clabber.
And Mother would take a straight-back chair and run a broom handle or some kind of handle from chair to the table, and then tie this bag onto it. Put a You know what a wash tub is? A foot tub underneath it, and catch the drippings. So we had cottage cheese, we had butter, we had milk. We had all the vegetables you could ever eat from the garden. And meat. We had the various pork, you know, the ham, the shoulder, sausage. And beef, we had the cows. Now, we did not butcher the cows. They were taken to a butcher, you know, a certified butcher, and he would do that part of it. But here we were. We had it.
There it is. Very cool. So next up, these guys have these guys talk a little bit about how they were sort of early innovators on the farm, and you know how they did some really neat stuff with electricity, and how they, you know, were the earlier rotational grazing folks, cover crops and whatnot, and how Jesse Short, the original Jesse, and then Jesse Short, their brother, really advanced that and took sort of the science of farming to another level. So let's hear a little bit about that.
We have said this just recently, that my recently deceased brother, Jesse Short III, our father, Jesse Short Jr., and his father, Jesse Short Sr., understood the wise management of land to prevent soil erosion. They always had cover crops in the winter. Mm-hmm. Then there was no-till later on. We terraced land because we actually ran 4 farms. The 2 on either side of Old Charlotte, which we defined as 2. Our aunt actually owned the back one, but we traded out. And we farmed for her the other 2, the Davis Place and Cotton Place, which are now Franklin Green. And the hog production and the beef cattle were over there. We terraced some of that. It was washing, so we had it graded so it caught the water and let it flow through. There were other soil management. We put some of our farm in the land bank. There were all kinds of things that we were working very hard to make sure that the land was arable. We rotated crops. Alfalfa hay we thought was richer than just grass. It gave a lot more, the leaf gave a lot more nourishment, but it also puts nitrogen in the soil. So we let a field be alfalfa for 3 years, and we'd rotate and grow corn. The alfalfa had left the soil richer for the corn to grow. My brother had excruciatingly detailed formulas for what kind of feed a dairy cow would have. A lactating mother needed the enriched proteins and vitamins and minerals. Sometimes tankage, which is, of course, the blood left over from a rendering house, made into a highly nutritious feed. There were sometimes other additives that were minerals. Hogs, he crossbred 2 breeds of hogs to get the right balance of lean and fat. He knew how to do that. We took our hogs to market at Newhoff in Nashville, and they were like, just buy them. We know this family gets us. They know what they're doing. So again, we look at the efficiencies beginning in the 19th century. The windmill pumped water, air power, into a tank for the cows to drink out of, and we let it overflow to create a pond because the hogs were sharing that. Since they can't perspire, they have to stay wet to stay cool. There was a perpetual motion pump known as a ram. Again, our grandparents had this on the front branch. That, when primed, would pump water up for the horses and the other animals there near the main house. These efficiencies look attractive to us in the 21st century because they were natural energy. We thought that was pretty smart.
Yeah.
Tobacco. And again, I can talk to you about how that came through. That's a 13-month crop. You're not through with one before you're planting the next one, nursing it along. The stalks, after the tobacco leaves are stripped, those were spread on the pastures and rotted down and gave their own nutrition besides the cows fertilizing and watering them as they were grazing. We recycled anything we could to make sure that it was in I guess that's composting, but we didn't think much about it. You just did that. All that the holding pen for the dairy cows, that could get kind of mucky. But all that manure went to a spreader, and that was spread on pastures, either the night pasture or the day pasture. So those were, again, enriched soils. I was pleased to hear that the soil testing we had done recently, we came out with top-tier soils. Again, a tribute to our relatives in there.
Well, a farm that's been farmed as long as this one has, if you hadn't used those practices, you would have trouble.
Right.
And Jesse learned, I got right hacked when I would hear people say, oh, he's just a farmer. Because I knew what went into farming. You couldn't be, I don't know. Anyway, I asked him about some things, and he said, well, let me explain to you. And he went through the grains, the basic grains that would be grown, and told you how much protein was in each one, how much, all the nutrients. And, I wanted, and in that blue book we did, I think it's in there.
Well, he did the same for whether it was Lespedeza or whatever the fodder we were bringing in for the cows. Well, he would grow Sudex, and you would have that. It looks like corn, but it grows up about shoulder height. And that would be a quick feed for cows, again, needing heavy nutrition, when the silage was running low. And silage, of course, is the entire stalk of the corn, ear and all, ground up. The silage, the silo would have been filled by the end of September. We would have started feeding it out as the grasses die back in the winter. One thing you learn living on a farm, you live by the seasons, and you live by the weather. I mean,
yes,
we thought we were going to take up, no rain, and we saw the fellow who's renting from it, his whole wheat crop just cooked in the field. He had to plow it under. He lost everything. We've had that happen. So it's a humbling thing. You have to take what you're dealing with every day and have the wisdom to know how to manage that. Ask about hog killing. It would be in November, but you'd look for a 3-day period when the weather was above freezing, but near it. So the meat would stay safe to eat until it was finally salted, and the sugar and all those minerals, the seasonings, until it was cured. An old practice, but we continued doing this well up into the 50s and 60s and enjoyed our own cured hams and sausage.
Yeah. Since income for the family, it was tobacco. Well, you didn't get a check till December or late November. I mean, it was end of year. You worked a year with no income. And so that was when Daddy decided to go to being full-time dairy, because you got to check all the time.
And the herd got up to around 50. They were all Holsteins. We produced about a ton of milk every other day. That was kind of out. We sold to the national milk producers. Early on, up until the 40s, we had enough milk for the house. We had Jerseys and Guernseys, remember Brownie? And then the rest was put in cans and sold to the cheese plant in Franklin. And ironically, we would buy that and be eating cheese made with some of our milk and some of others. But no, with 4 kids to put through college, Daddy decided that once a year tobacco crop, hogs and cattle, whenever they're ready for market, was not going to be an efficiency. So we, in 1953, went with a full professional dairy farm.
Oh, the lamb.
The lambs. Yeah. The sheep are funny. They have 2 udders. If they have twins, they sometimes make a Sophie's choice and they abandon one of their twins. This is nature. They could raise both, but somehow they're instinctual about this. So it's winter. Daddy learns from Mr. Langford, who lived over there with the sheep area, that there was an abandoned lamb. So we went to this old rundown cabin. It was kind of a log place up there that the lamb had been put in. Bring it home to the house. The game is that I'm asked to mind the lamb. So we go down in the basement to the coal bin, lots of gunny sacks. We feed the lamb with a Jack Daniels bottle with a rubber nipple on it, warm cow's milk that mother's warmed on the stove. I'm nursing, feeding the little lamb, and he's fine. Tucks in, I'll go to bed. About 2 a.m., the lamb gets hungry, and since it's in the basement with all the pipes going to all the floors, the little man went to everybody. And I was instructed, you will be getting up and taking care of your lamb. Anyway, it was fun. I thought it was all great. And when it got big enough, it could be outside, but it was too small and too
in my era, they were not in the basement. They were on the first floor. And they would put them over a register, a heating element in the floor. And then same thing, we were always instructed, close the kitchen door and the dining room door, because the lamb would be up, same thing, through the night. So grandmother Short which would be Jesse Sr.'s wife, that generation, raised, help me,
Caracou,
lamb.
Persian lamb.
You know, the curly look, yeah. And I have saved a coat that was damaged. Well, I have her coat, and if it's not damaged, I take care of it. But I have another one, and I'm going to cut some samples of that out so people can see what we're talking about. And those lambs, once they got a certain age, they turned just like all sheep. I mean,
It
they
was a
turned
craze.
white.
Yeah, it was a European and Russian thing, but it became a fashion craze. And Grandfather Short introduced Caracou sheep. He was okay with the practice, but you don't shear them. It's pelts. And so he was never around when all that was going on.
Yeah, you'd have
The
to
lamb's wool is a certain grade in the womb, and it kinks and unkinks after birth. And there are gradations of all that stuff there. But it was much admired, and people tried raising their own caracouls. He finally shut it down. He didn't. He thought it was inhumane.
Okay.
Wow, that's amazing to see that they were innovating even back then. And now as we look forward to create this project that is innovative in its own and new way, but also bringing some of those old ways forward, that's pretty neat to see the full circle.
Yeah. And, and as it, of course, the tobacco business and the dairy business have come a long way in the last 100 or so years, and so while we won't be growing tobacco on the farm, and the dairy business is a really, really tough thing to do right here, that is the history of this farm, and that's what it was. And it's so neat to see the different iterations that it took. I mean, like they talk about they did tobacco. Of course, they were always growing vegetables, and they did dairy, and then they had pork and all that stuff, and then even into the lamb and the sheep. And it sounds like that was probably the right thing to do, was to get out of the lamb business. But nevertheless, that sort of, you do what you have to do to pay the bills is an important thing of the history of farming in America. And now what I think we're trying to do here is to create an opportunity to where we can make small scale farming viable again as an amenity to a place to live, and actually create the food hub and make it sort of be a distribution hub. So I think we're hopefully continuing on the path that they already set.
Well, one of the things that's cool too is, even though there's some negative connotation with the tobacco industry, we end up with this amazing building in the tobacco barn that's like a cathedral unto itself. And, for us to figure out a way to take that and repurpose it into something that will be, a landmark on the site, is going to be pretty special to see what becomes of that.
And the dairy barn will be the kitchen,
right,
for that, for that event space that the tobacco farm will be. So it's neat to see how we continue to repurpose and reuse everything that we have given to us. All right, this next section here is all about the old Boyd Mill. Turns out they were related, and they owned the Boyd Mill for a long time. Boyd Mill, as you know, or some of you may know, is on the Harpeth River, right up the street here in off Boyd Mill Lane. I guess it is Boyd Mill Pike. Yes, Pike.
Yep.
Anyway, and so they talk through how the granary was used, and you get to, and for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see a little sneak peek of the granary and the big scale that's in there. So when we on site, we showed that. So let's have a listen.
All right. Our grandmother, great grandmother Boyd, and her family had the mill built by others, but they were running it at that time in the 1880s, and that worked well. But later, the Shorts bought the mill, and that scale at the granary, that very old Fairbanks scale, would be where people who were bringing their corn or their wheat, or I guess if they had other grains, would be weighing in there, recording their weight there, the empty wagon, and then they bring the wagon full of their grain. That then would be taken up to the mill, where it was turned into cornmeal or to flour, and brought back to the Short farm. So we worked in synchronicity at that point with the Boyd's Mill.
And for the longest time in the Harpeth River, where Boyd Mill, the mill was, you could see these big stones
Yeah, the paddle wheel, and then,
Yeah.
of course the stones were inside the mill. We'd go up there. The mill was beginning to crumble and fall in the 50s, and we hoped to get one of the millstones out, but it was just too heavy.
Yeah.
Even with the log chain, we couldn't move it. But they were rescued. Somebody has them. It's exciting to think that an approximation of the mill might get built back, and that the river might run enough to turn the grindstones. Daddy was fourth generation in the bank, right?
Our grandfather was there, and then Daddy.
Yeah, our brother Walter was in a long line of bankers for Williamson County Bank. It eventually became Bank of America. And that combination of banker-farmer, I think, was the part of our success, because, as so many people did, they'd grown up in the country, they kept their farm, they moved to town, and I know Grandfather Short would come out and work with the two foremen to make sure he knew what was going to happen that day on the farm. And then he would go back to town. He might get a call, but basically the foreman and the help at that point would run Westbrook Farm, which was cattle and hogs and sheep.
It was during World War II when the people that had been running the farm, the various jobs on the farm, were drafted, and they had to leave. Well, there was a farm with no workers. So that's when Daddy left the bank and came home and started working. But we had an interesting thing there. Because our workers were fighting Germany, there were German prisoners that had been brought here to Fayetteville, to the air base, or whatever kind of base there is, a military base. And so they hired the German soldiers to come work in lieu of the normal workers, which is interesting. And no guard. And one of my daughters said, "You mean you had people there, no guard?" I said, "Where are they going?" And they sure didn't want to go back to Germany at that point. So, yeah.
Well,
And-
you were living on the farm at that time. What was Mother's instruction to you?
Oh, not to go out there where the German men are.
They enjoyed Mother's cooking. The few that could speak English were telling her they really appreciated her, and she felt sorry for them. One said, though, the cornbread scratches our throats. They'd never had a meal bread before. They were like making playful little things. She would make them biscuit bread instead. And one of them referred to her pound cake as sand cake. She told me these stories, and I said, "What did that mean?" She said, well, she didn't understand it either, but they described it as if you were at the beach and you got a little pail full of wet sand. It's heavy. So they liked her heavy, fresh-baked pound cake. It's an interesting story. The countries are at war, but these poor displaced people weren't. You know, we were seeing them as individuals, not as enemies.
Yeah.
Well, that was pretty cool.
Amazing.
Yeah. I'd heard that story before, sort of in the shorter version of that. Yes, there were German prisoners of war that worked on that farm across the street and many farms in the area. And it's just really, it's something I never thought about, that because so many of our able-bodied men were overseas fighting, that who was here to tend the farm. And so, and in a weird turn, they had German prisoners of war here working the farm. And it sounded like there was I wouldn't say a close relationship built among the Short family and the German prisoners, but nevertheless, there was, they were just people just trying to get through the day, and there was work to be done, and they had to do it.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a really fascinating chapter in the Short farm history. It's wild. So this next section here is all about the different people that worked on the farm and the relationships they made and how they interacted with them, how they were paid and why and all that kind of stuff. And so this is just a neat section about where, more about what life was like on the farm back then. So check it out.
Yes, when I'm a wee one. Mother would look for someone to help mind me while she was busy doing everything else she had to do. The Brown family lived just behind us in the tenant house on Old Charlotte. Mr. Brown, Leroy, would come to milk the cows twice a day. And he had free time, and she and I would spend a lot of time, she minding me and me telling her stories I made up. And the great thing was she loved playing into all my made-up stories, and she saw my owl up in the tree and the airplanes and things. And
That word.
how could she? I thought that was great. No, she and I had a close relationship. As I grew older, again, Mother knew where we were. We would go fishing together on the Harpeth River, and Annie would take her 2 purses. I was confused to start with, but one had her Coke and her cigarettes in it. The other was an old one that she used as a creel to put her fish in. So we just had a great time. We solved the world's problems, and we talked a lot about life of growing up together. She knowing Mother so well, and they would, be sharing recipes, and Annie would teach her about the ways to cook and use farm produce. So those 2 women really were, very close to each other. And there was a little playhouse out in the side yard, and we would play around that. She would put out an old quilt, and we'd sit together and talk. It was just a wonderful way to have a really warm companion growing up. She was a great person. In the summer, it seems ridiculous now, but football players love to come out and do farm labor, work on their tan, and work on upper body strength. If you're digging post holes, you're using your upper body strength. Taking up hay, combining these, we would have 5 or 6 people show up and ask for work. Not all high school students. Sometimes there were actually families who were in their way migrant. They'd live somewhere for a year or 2, but they would work whatever work was available. For day wages, and they were glad to get that. It varied by season. After school started, we wouldn't have as many people showing up to ask to work. Daddy would turn some away if we didn't have anything for him to do, but he was often glad to have the extra help to try to get a crop in before the sunset. But the problem is, he particularly hated daylight savings time. We worked by the sun, and many of these younger people wanted to be off to be somewhere at 5 or 6 o'clock. So the rest of us, the family, were left to finish the day's work. We were home, so we would continue working.
Yeah, sounds like Jesse Short was a pretty stand-up guy.
Definitely seemed like he cared about the people that work with them and for them, and that's really interesting to hear those very detailed and sort of intimate stories of the relationships on the farm, the community that was created amongst everybody there.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's really neat. I think that's something that we're trying to build here, which is a community and a mixed use community where people live, work, learn, and play all in one place, and how everybody's sort of together. So the people that, maybe you don't even live in Armistead, but you work there, and maybe you work on the farm and work somewhere else. And the idea that, that we can continue this sort of legacy and this history of about everybody working together, and these, sort of disparate people from disparate cultures coming together to create a melting pot of culture and community is exactly what this type of mixed use communities are all about. And so it'll be neat to see us try and pull that off ourselves.
Yeah, no, it definitely works. If you create the right form, the right structure, the right layout, and have the right programming within the community, it happens that way. It's not just sort of a theoretical, sort of planning pie in the sky. I've seen it time and again around the country.
That's right. So it is, as we're taping this is the 1st of November, or the first part of November, and it is getting cold. And I was just driving by the farm today, and they were plowing the field. They were cutting down the old, I guess it was the corn or the soybeans that were up there. And so
you're gonna have to learn your corn from your soybeans, Craig.
You're right. So it's neat that this little section here, they talk about what you do in the winter, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of activities that we do in the winter. Everybody talks about, oh, well, this is an agri-hood. It's like, well, agriculture is about a 9-month operation, really, and then there's 3.5 months where it's pretty fallow out there, and you're not doing a ton of growing or harvesting or planting, but that doesn't mean the work is done. And they talk a little bit about what they have to do here, as well as they get into discussions about what Franklin was like back in the day, and how, because 96 wasn't there, when these guys were young. And so yeah, let's hear what they have to say here. Mm-hmm.
Well, wintertime, we'd be feeding the same livestock we've had every day. That didn't change. We would be stripping tobacco, getting it ready for market. Daddy would work in the tobacco warehouse as an accountant, as a bookkeeper. In the deepest part of winter before plowing season, we'd be welding gates, getting things ready that you could do indoors when the weather was not so easy to work with. The seed catalogs would come. We would get all excited about what we want to plant in the garden, what we want to plant in the flower beds. Yeah. And by spring, early spring, you've got the big disc plow out there. You're turning ground. Plowing's done. You're going to get the soil surgeon or the harrow or something else to get it ready to plant. So you're into planting season. So it's, winter was a downtime, but it really wasn't in any real sense a time to do nothing. We had, as I said, gates to weld and other things to fix, barn repairs, all those things you do in off season. We were on a gravel road.
Yes.
Until that highway, the Boyd Mill Pike, 3 miles into Franklin.
Okay, Gentry Farm was there. It wasn't called Gentry then, but it was there. You went around what was referred to as Monkey Hill. No monkeys. There was a man there who was nicknamed Monkey, and he ran a store which was built out of concrete block. It was not large. It was
one room,
maybe as big as this room.
Maybe.
But he had the things like baking soda, anything canned, and nothing fresh. Then the people that lived on that stretch of the road didn't have a lot of education a lot of times. And they would bring their children down to Mother and ask her, like she was a nurse, which she wasn't, or to read a thermometer. They had no idea. And this is mercury, under your tongue thermometer. And she would take their temperature, advise them as to, this is a bad cold, I think it'll be better. Or, no, you need to take this child in, fever 104, come on. Mm. But they didn't know, they just knew the child was sick. Now, they cared about the children. I don't mean to say they were indifferent. It was just lack of education. So she would be the person that would help with those kind of things.
So there you have it.
That sounds like a talented lady.
Yes, right. Hopefully we will have licensed medical professionals at Armistead that will be able to take care of the children of the community and everyone else. But it sounds like that's just the way it was. If you had somebody that was a trusted member of the community, and it sure sounds like their mom was, that you did what it took. It takes a village to create a community, and that's what they did. So again, I want to thank Jay Sheridan for coming down here. He's serving as sort of our archivist as well, and so one day we'll be able to sort of collate and release all of this sort of historical information and how we'll use it. We're not quite sure, but this is an important part of the process. Jay just actually talked to him today, and he said he spent more time with Mary Ann just that last week and sort of went through the archives and old pictures and all that kind of stuff. So when Jay sinks his teeth into something, generally the output is pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he pulls together there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too when we're looking to create, a new village. Essentially, we have the opportunity now to the forethought to actually keep up with the stuff and decisions. And I always think about all the places that I've loved, historic places that I visited or whatever. I would love to just like read the journals of the planner or the people who developed and created it and say like, well, how did you make that road do this little thing? Why did you do that? And what were the circumstances that led you to do these things? And so I hope that, as we go, we can keep up with even some of those very detailed things in addition to documenting the past. I'd like to, document the future and the present. So.
Yeah, I think that's really neat. I think about that all the time when I see a great town center and because it wasn't built in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And what were the different iterations or the different developmental steps that this town center made to get to become what it is. I mean, certainly you think about places in Italy and these Siena, the great horse rink that
Piazza del Campo.
Okay, there we go. Of course, don't bring up the planner; he'll grab it. Those type of things, like how it developed over time. That would just be such a fascinating thing to do, and I look forward to sort of archiving this and tracking that as we go.
Yeah, I mean, I can think about a place in the plan right now that, as we've been refining the plan, we realized there was a tree right in the middle of where the road was drawn initially, and we wanted to go around it, and so the road has this really interesting curvature, just so slightly to make sure we miss that tree.
Yeah.
And maybe one day that tree won't be there, but we'll know here's why we did that.
Yeah. We'll put a little sign, that little guy on the tree that says, "Thanks, Brian, for not running me over." We hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you again to Jay, and especially to Marianne and Bilbo for taking the time out, coming over here and recording for us. We will see more of them, I suspect, as we go along. They are a wealth of information and history, and we hope to continue to tap into that.
Yeah, and let us know in the comments too if you these kind of stories about the history and all of that. We started this with the intention of focusing on development updates and all that, but we started to realize there's so much more, so many more things that we can share that might be of interest to people, and so just let us know what other types of things you might like to hear as well.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.